Hello, and how's it going? Welcome to the channel, and I am here for a versus video for you guys. This is once again a band versus video. I'm going to be comparing one band, putting them up against another, and you're going to find out which band I do prefer. Again, if you like these type of videos, feel free to let me know in the comments. So for this video, we're going to be taking a look at two bands that are in the 2000s hard rock scene. Those, of course, being Breaking Benjamin and 3 Days Grace. Now, I need to get this right out of the way by saying that I do like both bands. I think that both these bands are great, but obviously I do prefer one a lot more than the other. And I know some people may disagree, maybe not a whole lot of people, because I feel like my opinion is pretty popular when it comes to this one. But I'm just going to get this right out of the way by saying that I do prefer Breaking Benjamin over 3 Days Grace. I'm sure that doesn't really surprise a lot of people, and I know some people might say, well, you know, that's because you've been a fan of Breaking Benjamin longer or whatever. Sure, that is part of it. I will admit nostalgia does play a factor to why I do prefer Breaking Benjamin a little bit more. But I always try my best to not let nostalgia blind me from, you know, the actual music itself, because I feel like that's a struggle that a lot of people do have. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with nostalgia or anything, but I just don't think that you should let it blind you from the actual music itself. You know what I mean? So that's something to keep in mind as well. Like, you got to look at music more objectively than that. But even without nostalgia, I still do think that Breaking Benjamin is just musically more interesting. I feel like that they offer more, like, musically, and the structures of their songs, and just, I just feel like they have more variety overall than 3 Days Grace does. I think there's no other way around that one. Now, of course, you know, we're going to go, like, give an overview. I'm going to be talking about all their albums, because I think each band has 6 albums currently, not including Aurora, of course. So since these guys don't have that many studio albums, we can probably get through this fairly quick, but we'll see, of course. But we got to compare their debut records. I mean, you got Saturate by Breaking Benjamin and the self-titled 3 Days Grace debut album. I mean, there's no other way around it. I definitely prefer Saturate over 3 Days Grace's debut album. Some people might not agree with that, because I think, you know, 3 Days Grace actually had a really good debut album. Is it their best album? No, I wouldn't say so, but I do think it is a very good album nonetheless, but there's really no denying the greatness of Saturate, though. I actually think this album is pretty underrated. There's a lot of Breaking Benjamin fans that do say that this is one of their weakest, which I don't agree with. I don't agree with at all. I think the reason that a lot of fans say that it's one of their weakest is because, you know, it's not as radio-friendly as the other stuff in Breaking Benjamin's discography, but I don't know. I just really dig this album. I dig the Tool influences and the grunge influences and just how raw this album is. I think it's just really underrated, and it's a great album and one of my personal favorite Breaking Benjamin albums. I know that's rather unpopular, but it is what it is. But 3 Days Grace's debut is still really good, though. And then we got the second albums. We got We Are Not Alone by Breaking Benjamin and 1X by 3 Days Grace. Now, this one is pretty much a no-brainer. I definitely prefer 1X, so when it comes to second albums, 3 Days Grace actually has the upper hand. 3 Days Grace actually has the better second album, I'd say. And 1X is my personal favorite 3 Days Grace album, and it's got to be their best and essential for any 3 Days Grace fan, I think. But We Are Not Alone, I do think, is one of Breaking Benjamin's weakest. Actually, I think it is their weakest album. I know that might come off as unpopular, but it is what it is. But is it a terrible album? I don't think so. I just don't think it's as good as the other stuff that Breaking Benjamin had to offer. And then we get to third albums. We got Phobia by Breaking Benjamin and Life Starts Now by 3 Days Grace. I definitely prefer Phobia opposed to Life Starts Now. This one might be a little debatable, I guess, because Life Starts Now is actually, I'd say, is another one of 3 Days Grace's best albums. But I don't know. I think the majority of Breaking Benjamin stuff is just better, in my opinion. And Phobia is actually my favorite Breaking Benjamin album. I mean, it has some of their best songs on it, like The Diary of Jane, Evil Angel, Until the End, Unknown Soldier, and a few others. But yeah, Phobia is just an excellent album, and it's, again, my favorite Breaking Benjamin album. So I do like it more than Life Starts Now, to be quite honest. And then we get to the fourth albums, Dear Agony by Breaking Benjamin and Transit of Venus by 3 Days Grace. I definitely prefer Dear Agony over Transit of Venus. So, as you guys can tell already, Breaking Benjamin, just with the first 4 albums, they were already in the lead. The only competition that they really had was with the second albums, because, I mean, 1X destroys We Are Not Alone, in my opinion. But when it comes to the fourth albums, Dear Agony takes the cake for me. And Dear Agony was also one of my first albums. Like, I believe it was actually my first, like, actual studio album ever, like, ever hearing, you know? So it does have a little bit of nostalgia factor with it, too. But I actually think Dear Agony is another one of Breaking Benjamin's best. Maybe. I don't know. I think without nostalgia, I'd probably like it less. But I think with the nostalgia, that's really one of the things that are keeping it, you know, in my top 3 Breaking Benjamin albums. But it's a great album nonetheless. Breaking Benjamin, I don't think, has ever really released a bad album, besides some of the stuff on We Are Not Alone, but I don't know. Dear Agony is definitely a great album, though. And Transit of Venus, I think, is definitely one of 3 Days Grace's worst albums, and it's definitely the worst album with Adam. I mean, there's no way around that one. And then we get to 5th albums. We got Dark Before Dawn by Breaking Benjamin and Human by 3 Days Grace. Now, this is kind of a turning point for both bands, because Dark Before Dawn was Breaking Benjamin's first album in quite a few years, like 5 or 6 years. So, of course, you know, it was long anticipated. Not as long anticipated like it is for other bands, maybe like Tool or As I Lay Dying, but it's, you know, still been a little while since the last Breaking Benjamin album at that point. And with 3 Days Grace, they got a new frontman, and this kind of divided the fan base. So, I don't know. This is something that's, you know, it's a little, this can kind of be seen as a mixed bag, because I think, you know, a lot of people kind of put these 2 albums, like, just tied up. You know, there's not really one better than another or whatever. But I do gotta say that I do prefer Dark Before Dawn over Human, to be quite honest. This might not surprise a lot of people. Now, Human is not a bad album, but I think it is another one of 3 Days Grace's weakest albums. Not as bad as Transit of Venus, in my opinion, but still not as good as, you know, albums like 1X and Life Starts Now. And, you know, the same could be said about Dark Before Dawn, too. Some people might say, well, Dark Before Dawn isn't one of their best, you know? I would definitely agree with that. It's definitely not one of their best, but I think it's still a great album, and I like it more than Human. And then we get to 6th albums. We got Ember by Breaking Benjamin and Outsider by 3 Days Grace. This one's pretty much a no-brainer. I definitely prefer Ember over Outsider. And there's a lot of reasons for this. I think Ember just offers more variety. But the variety thing is something I will get into more. And again, I would say that it is more than just nostalgia to why I do prefer Breaking Benjamin overall than 3 Days Grace. I do think that Breaking Benjamin musically is more interesting, a lot more dynamic, and the vocals. I definitely prefer Breaking Benjamin's vocals than both of 3 Days Grace's vocalists. That includes Adam Gontier and Matt Walsh. I think that Ben Burnley is actually better than both of them, even though they're good vocalists as well. That's not, you know, to, you know, diss on them or anything, but I just prefer Ben Burnley of Breaking Benjamin, you know, in his vocals. Now, I know that there's a lot of people that kind of overhype Ben Burnley and his vocals, and I just personally don't see it. I personally don't think that Ben Burnley is one of the greatest vocalists of all time. Sure, like I said, I do think he's better than 3 Days Grace's vocals, but I mean, just in general, I think there's better vocalists out there than even Ben Burnley. I know that's hard for people to believe, but the thing is, I just don't think Ben Burnley has that much range to his vocals. That's something that I do have to point out, though. But again, the music is more dynamic and just musically more intriguing and interesting. And, you know, Breaking Benjamin also offers more variety as well, you know. 3 Days Grace is a band that I feel like doesn't really know how to step outside of the box all that much. Not to mention, Breaking Benjamin also uses screaming, and that's something that 3 Days Grace kind of doesn't use. Now, Breaking Benjamin doesn't scream, they don't use scream vocals like, you know, metalcore bands do or anything, but, you know, just for like a second or something. And again, it comes with that dynamic nature of their music. And it offers more variety, I think, because some of their songs use that and some songs don't use that. And another thing that I do have to give points to Breaking Benjamin for are the lyrics. Now, I think this one's pretty much a no-brainer. I think Breaking Benjamin lyrically is also better than 3 Days Grace. The thing is with 3 Days Grace, it seems like they just stick with this same idea as far as the lyrics are concerned. Like, just all about bad relationships, bad breakups, whatever you want to call it. And that's basically the majority of their lyrical themes. And it can kind of get a little, sometimes cringeworthy and just sometimes, I don't know, just not as good as, you know, lyrics from other bands, you know? And Breaking Benjamin, I feel like, gets more personal with the lyrics. You know what I mean? And I gotta give points to Breaking Benjamin as far as the lyrics go, but yeah, I definitely prefer Breaking Benjamin overall than 3 Days Grace. Now, again, I don't think this is an unpopular opinion. I think most people do prefer Breaking Benjamin over 3 Days Grace, but I do know that there are some people that do prefer 3 Days Grace over Breaking Benjamin, and that's fine, because again, they're both great bands, but I just think Breaking Benjamin offers more. But yeah, now I will say that Breaking Benjamin is a bit of an overhyped band. There's a lot of people that I have seen that just really praise them like there's no tomorrow. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous if you think about it. But again, they're a great band, but 3 Days Grace is too. In my opinion, they're not as good as Breaking Benjamin. I've always been a Breaking Benjamin guy than a 3 Days Grace guy, but that's just me. But let me know what you guys think. Which band do you prefer, Breaking Benjamin or 3 Days Grace? Feel free to let me know in the comments. So with that being said, thanks for watching, have a nice day, and take care.